back, I'm hoping. Um, Thank you for joining. I'm testing out new equipment tonight, so hopefully there's sound. Um, I am having, I don't have any feedback right now because I'm still trying to work with my setup. So hopefully this is going live to people and people can hear me. I have no way of being able to find out if that's the case or not, so I'm just going to go into it, and if it doesn't work, then I'll just record it again because that's the way I do it. Okay, so for those of you just tuning in, I'm currently reading, this is the third novel that I've been reading, um, called Stonecaller, and it's a fantasy novel. I'm currently reading it and also marking it up for editing, as I go along, and you get a story out of it. This is also my first time ever reading it, so we'll both be surprised by what happens in the story because I've never read this story before. So I don't know how it turns out or anything like that. So this is new to you as it is to me. So without further ado, Chapter 14, Stonecaller. The king had formed his army in front of them. It would have been nice to catch them spread out around the town, with all the resultant confusion that would come from having to haul that sort of scatter into a battle line. Oh, well, we can't have everything, I suppose. Quadrum, are you ready? Oh, yes, ready indeed. Did you make sure the troops were warned there'd be stones going overhead today? I passed the warning. You think it's going to be needed? They know you're with us, and at least the party that had to gather the stones for you all together are sure of it. It just might be needed. I'll just go off to my place now, unless you have final instructions for me. Gwathnarin merely shook his head. Quedrum's place was a smallish beehive-shaped hut, which he'd built the night before. It had just been a matter of stacking stones one on another, with a bit of care to balance, and though he wouldn't have liked to live in the thing for any time, it would do the trick. He looked at it. Up in the air now, he told it. Up in the air it went. He sent it floating over the heads of the Gafrati troops. He had supported these same soldiers in the previous battle, since Gwathnarin had thought they would be more used to the notion and not too skittish about stones floating about their heads, as he put it. Other than a few ducked heads, they did not react much as the stone hut floated over them. One of the foremen assigned to the guard, Quedrum muttered, "Dark Destroyer's teeth," as the hut went flying away. Quedrum knew he could have removed the stone house much faster, but he thought a slower approach would be better, giving the enemy a good look at what was coming toward them. He set it down slowly again, right in the middle of their ranks. It killed a few because most were able to get out of the way, but it did disorder their formation. He left it sit there for a bit. The enemy were loath to get close to it, fearing whatever magic or curse this might be would rub off on them. He picked the house up again and brought it back toward the Gafrati lines, moving it rapidly this time, taking it apart as it came. This was the maneuver he especially asked their commanders to warn them about. Seeing the troops coming their way might well give the Gafrati troops pause. The lines did indeed shiver a bit, and he heard, vaguely through his concentration, the 10 commanders and 100 commanders bawling out orders to stand their more core-eaten ground because the more core-eaten stone handler was on their side. At any rate, he dropped the mass of stones a fair distance out from their lines and began to reform it into a wall. The moving house had just been a bit of a ploy to shake their morale. The Gafrati army needed all the advantages it could get. Insofar as fighting the battle was concerned, the wall would do the actual work. Shortly the command to advance went up, and the troops began to advance toward each other. The wall, now complete, advanced as well. The king's troops were even less willing to come into contact with the wall than had been Socinda's. At first, a 50-foot section of the front rank halted, then backed into the ranks following it, causing a disorder that no amount of shouting from 10 commanders or 50 commanders could put to rights. Then a section of the line, somewhat more than 50 feet in length, was taking to its heels, in most cases shedding spears and shields to run faster. In the manner that had served so well in the previous battle, Quedrim marched the wall to his left and brought it back against the rear of the king's troops. Just as it was beginning to squeeze the enemy, Quedrim heard the sound of hoofbeats. Most of his mind was still engaged with the stones, but he looked back. 5 horsemen, Sobeldancer and some men of his household, approached them. Now what are that lot doing here? He wondered to himself abstractly, as he concentrated most of attention on the wall that was beginning to push against the rear rank of the king's men. So, you're doing it again. Stating the obvious, if anyone ever did. Sorry, Lord Sobeldancer. Can't talk at this moment. Got my hands full. Oh, indeed? Now, men! Quedrim was too involved in his own work to even be properly suspicious. His guards, however, had been chosen for their suspicious natures, and had, in almost casual fashion, arrayed themselves between Lord Sobeldancer and their charge. The attack did not take them by surprise, for they were moving even as the Lord shouted his command. However, the Lord's 4 men engaged one guard, allowing Sobeldancer to rush forward and attack Quedrim. Distracted as he was with the moving stones, Quedrim was caught almost completely unawares. What saved him was the time it took Sobeldancer to get his horse through the biting guardsmen. There was no straight path from the Lord to Quedrim either. The guards had seen to that. Still, Quedrim was just loosing his hold on the stones when Sobeldancer was beside him, sword swinging down. There was no time to do anything but evade the blow, which he attempted by the expedient flinging himself off his horse in the opposite direction to the Lord's attack. This attempt was only partially successful, for he felt a blow against his hip as he went off. He fell hard. Though he'd been able to curl an arm around his head, hooves moved closer, and he heard the Lord's muttered imprecations as he maneuvered for the killing stroke. There was a pebble beside Quedrim's head, a small white thing about the size of his first thumb joint. Still half dazed, he sent it up towards the Lord's unseen face above him. He heard the yell and rolled himself laboriously over on his side. The Lord was riding away, one hand clapped to his left eye. Quedrim was trying to pick up the other pebble to hit the Lord's horse, perhaps make the beast go wild, throw Sobeldancer. Suddenly everything faded away. From the sounds of men in pain, or men trying to swallow their pain with varying degrees of success, he was in the healer's tent once more. A tired-looking young man in the healer's garb, a dusty gray tunic and trousers with a powder blue sash, approached him. "Ah, you're awake. How do you feel?" "Like I've been trampled on by a more-core-eaten horse. What happened?" You took a rather bad wound in the side, just above the hip. We've done what we could for the wound, but you've been sleeping nearly a day and a half." "I assume we won? Otherwise I wouldn't be being treated so well." The young man's face went blank. "Won and lost are not things healers concern themselves with. The Lady Anavristi and Lord Gwathnarin both asked to be informed when you wake. One or both will be able to answer your questions." Quedrim didn't bother to respond. He had no desire to enter into an argument about battle, whether or not it had been necessary. In fact, all he could remember was landing his house on the enemy. No, he had a picture in his mind of a sword rising and falling. Who had been holding a sword? No, his mind refused to recall that. Gwathnaran supplies some missing bits of information. That Morcor Eaton Stolbenancer. He was trying to win a place with the king, so he went after you. Left it a bit late, though. You'd already done messing up the king's right flank, though not so badly as you did with Saucindas. The light infantry were able to exploit the gap, though small though it was, and eventually the king's army started to fade away. It was another battle, another Morcor Eaton hard fight, and a few more losses than I'd be comfortable with, but we won. And Avrishti spoke up again. Then, yes, we won. And as much as I hate to be the one to say it, I think our next move has to be to march at Gatuyos, as soon as Quadrum can travel. Gwathnaran gave her an inquisitive look. Not your usual attitude, Aniki. You're that angry because Stolbenancer tried to kill Quadrum? I'm angry about that, Gwathnaran, but that's a whole different matter. I'm going to have to defeat the king, and do it conclusively before you can recover and get an army together. Gwathnaran nodded. I thought I'd have to tell you that you're riding like the man. You're riding the man like the panther. The trouble is not so much in the riding as in the attempting to dismount. And the rest of my life is going to be spent looking over my shoulder to see just who might be wanting their turn on the panther's back. I hope you don't want me to be happy about that. Quadrum still couldn't remember anything about the fight besides dropping his house on the enemy. And that picture of the sword, evidently in Stolbenancer's hand, rising and falling. He pulled his mind away, trying to force it to fill empty spots, and said, You'd best wait until I can at least be hauled along in a litter. After a week, which Gwathnaran begrudged, though he knew moving to Quadrum too soon could be a mistake, they set out. The method adopted for carrying Quadrum was a hammock slung in an ox cart. The ropes of the hammock and sling took up much of the jolting, but despite that, it was not a comfortable ride. It was Quadrum's turn to complain in the evenings, lying, or later on in the journey, sitting up beside the fire. Old woman's apron! I think the oxen are managing to hit every rock and rut and lump in the road. I wonder if this is their secret revenge for their castration. Aha! How he complains, said Malsa, grinning. And this isn't even a forced march. For certain, old wolf Gwathnaran isn't wasting any time, but a forced march? No, not like some I've been on. Oh, be quiet, I'll drop a stone on your head. You wouldn't do that, so far as you've only got two friends, Jenny and me. Start dropping stones on heads, you won't have any friends at all. Except perhaps that you're a close friend of the Carmista, and she won't come and keep you company while you gripe. In the journey's later stages, when he could make his way around in the evenings leaning on a stick, he noticed that the ladies' army was growing larger, with strange contingents he'd never seen before. He was even present one evening when one such increase took place. Aides ushered a tallish, bearded man into the lady's presence, allured by the cut and ornamentation of his dress. He stood blinking a moment in the firelight, then finally recognized the Carmista herself. He dropped to his knees. "O mighty lady of Higfrid, I am Yolstan, Carmost of the dead... Oh boy. Jen. I've come to promise my aid and support your present endeavor." Quadrum watched with all this with some distaste. He was quite sure Yoltson would have cheered while the King Falcedon's executioner removed Lady Anavristi's head. Now she appeared to have the upper hand, probably in no small part because she had a man who could command stones. He was in a rush to support her. She surely knew all this was as well as Quadrum did, perhaps better. Her expression showed no sign of anything except welcome to this man who was suddenly switching alliances. Welcome, Carmos Yolstan. Rise and be welcome with us, among us. You will ride with me, of course? Part of Quedrum's cynical mind suggested Lord Yolstan would have preferred to be safe at home. But another part said, no, Lord Yolstan would have had to have known that he would be brought along. He'd desert one master. What might he do if someone else came to whisper in his ear, someone with royal aspirations and what seemed to be a foolproof plot? Quedrum happened to be standing near Gwathniren while all this was going on. He worked himself a little closer to the Lord. The lady's picking up more troops, it seems. Gwathniren's expression didn't change. Yoltson might have noticed a sneer, cherished it in his heart as an insult to be avenged by selling his loyalty to someone at an inopportune time for the lady. Yes, so long as I don't trust any of them in a real fight. We've been picking up bits and pieces of this sort, deserting the king's cause when he seems to be in trouble. Quedrum nodded, understanding all that hadn't been said. Such desertions were a help to the lady, making her seem stronger, while weakening the king by that little bit. How much reliance could be put on them if their fortunes seemed to change? Even a battlefield where the king seemed to have more force might be too much for some. It bore out altogether too well the statement he used to make, that everyone was out for themselves, and in a way, it was true. Everyone was out for themselves. What they wanted was not always the same thing, though. For Gwathniren, for instance, everything seemed to revolve around preventing trouble for the lady. Okay. So, that was it for tonight, for this chapter. Like I was saying, I will be taking tomorrow night off. I'm hoping you all had heard volume tonight. I was testing the mic out. I have a mic now, so hopefully that all worked. If you didn't hear anything, then I would have liked to have heard you guys pipe up in the chat and let me know. Because I have a setup now, which seems to work. And then after I'm done wrapping it up, I will be taking a time off for a couple weeks while I get another story together. Basically just print it off and try and decide which one I'm going to go with. I have a few in mind. I have many to go. I've told you 3, and there's at least 50 more to go. So I will talk to you again on Thursday. Have a good night.